The city tram system was one of the few things in the metropolis that still followed a predictable rhythm. It didn't care about arguments, weather, or the chaos of daily life. It arrived, it stopped, and it moved on again, carrying tired workers, students, and the occasional tourist who had underestimated how fast the city could swallow them. People learned to ignore most of what happened inside it. That was the rule. Look forward. Don't stare. Don't interfere. So at first, nobody noticed the small passenger. Or rather, they noticed it but refused to process it. A tiny dragon hatchling sitting on the edge of a plastic seat near the window, perfectly still, as if it belonged there. It was small enough that it could have been mistaken for an exotic pet at a distance. Soft scales shimmered faintly under the tram's fluorescent lights, shifting color depending on the angle, like heat trapped under glass. Its wings were tucked neatly against its body, and its head tilted slightly as it watched the city pass outside. The tram rattled forward. People stood nearby, and nobody spoke, not because they didn't see it, but because acknowledging it felt like crossing a line no one was prepared to step over. A man in a gray coat glanced at it once, then looked away quickly, as if pretending he hadn't. A student across the aisle whispered something to her friend, who immediately shook her head in silent warning. Don't engage. The hatchling didn't move much. It didn't cause trouble. Simply rode. Every day. Same line. Same time. Same seat near the window. Always alone. The tram slowed at the next stop, doors hissing open. A rush of commuters entered, filling the space with movement and noise. The hatchling lifted its head slightly, tracking them with calm, observant eyes, but it did not shift. It stayed exactly where it was. A woman carrying groceries hesitated as she stepped inside. Her eyes locked onto the small creature for a brief second. Then she quickly chose a seat on the opposite side of the tram. It's still here, someone murmured near the back. Third day this week, another voice replied softly. Nobody sounded surprised anymore, just unsettled, resigned. The tram continued forward, swaying gently as it crossed elevated tracks overlooking the lower industrial districts. The hatchling turned its head toward the glass, watching the sprawling cityscape with quiet focus. It didn't blink much. It didn't fidget. It simply observed everything like it was memorizing it. That, more than anything, made people uncomfortable. A living thing that large could not normally be this calm in such a confined space. And yet, it was. A man sitting 2 rows away finally spoke, quietly, to no one in particular. That thing belongs to someone, right? No one answered him. A teenage boy nearby shrugged slightly. If it does, he muttered. They're really trusting the tram system. A few nervous laughs followed, but they faded quickly. The hatchling shifted slightly as the tram turned. Its claws clicked faintly against the floor. It adjusted its balance, then settled again, still facing the window. Outside, the city changed from commercial blocks to older residential districts. Narrower streets, denser buildings, more noise, more life. The hatchling's eyes tracked every detail, every movement, every shift of light. It was learning something, but no one could tell what. The tram slowed again. Another stop. Doors opened. A gust of air rushed in, carrying the smell of street food and exhaust. A young boy stood at the entrance, holding onto his mother's hand tightly. He noticed the hatchling immediately. His eyes widened. "Mom!" he whispered. The woman saw it too. She froze for a fraction of a second, then gently pulled him forward. "Don't stare," she said quickly under her breath. "Just sit." They moved past it and took seats further down. The hatchling tilted its head slightly as they passed, watching the boy with quiet curiosity. But again, it did nothing. No movement, no sound, just observation. That was when people started to notice something stranger than its presence. It wasn't behaving like a wild animal. It wasn't even behaving like a domesticated one. It was behaving like a commuter, like it had somewhere to go. The tram doors closed again. The vehicle jolted forward. And somewhere in the middle of that ordinary motion, a deeper unease began to settle in. Because no one had ever seen it board. And no one had ever seen it leave. It just appeared and disappeared every day, like it belonged to the city more than the people did. And on this particular morning, as the tram crossed into the central district, the hatchling finally did something different. It stood up. The moment the hatchling stood up, the entire tram felt it, even if most passengers didn't understand what they were feeling. It wasn't noise or movement that changed the atmosphere. It was intention, a shift in focus, like something small deciding it was no longer just observing. The tiny dragon stretched its wings slightly, not fully opening them, just enough for the faint membranes to catch the fluorescent light and shimmer like liquid glass. A few passengers instinctively looked away. Others pretended not to notice at all. But everyone noticed. The hatchling stepped forward, one careful paw at a time. Its claws made soft clicking sounds against the tram floor, rhythmic and deliberate. It moved past seated passengers without hesitation, weaving through narrow spaces with surprising balance for something so small. It didn't bump into anything. It didn't hesitate. It knew exactly where it was going. A woman near the aisle pulled her bag closer to herself as it passed. The hatchling didn't react. It simply continued forward until it reached the center of the carriage. Then it stopped. The tram was now moving through a long elevated stretch above the river, sunlight reflecting off the water below and flickering through the windows. The city skyline loomed ahead, dense, layered, endless. The hatchling turned its head slowly, looking at all of it at once. Every building, every bridge, every moving light. And then it did something that silenced even the quiet murmurs. It exhaled. Not fire, not smoke, just a soft pulse of warm air that fogged the window slightly in front of it. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably. "Okay," someone muttered. "That's new." The hatchling ignored them, pressed one small paw against the glass. And for a brief moment it stayed like that, still focused, almost thoughtful, like it was remembering something, or waiting for something. The tram passed another station without stopping. No one pressed the stop request. No one wanted to move. The hatchling finally lowered its paw and turned its head slightly toward the passengers. Its glowing eyes scanned them slowly, not threatening, not hostile, just aware, as if it had just confirmed something important. A man sitting near the back leaned toward the aisle and whispered, "Why does it keep riding this route?" No one answered, but the question lingered, because it wasn't random, couldn't be random. The tram continued forward into the heart of the city, where buildings grew taller and shadows deeper. The hatchling returned to its seat, except now people noticed something they hadn't before. It always sat in the same place, same angle, same direction, facing forward, toward the central district hub. Every day, without fail, like a schedule, like a destination. The tram slowed again as it approached a major interchange station. The doors hissed open. A wave of commuters entered and exited. Noise filled the carriage. Movement surged. And for the first time, the hatchling did not immediately settle. It remained standing, watching the doors. A few passengers followed its gaze without thinking. Nothing unusual at first. Just people boarding, talking, rushing. But then something subtle changed. The hatchling's body tensed. Slightly. Not fear. Recognition. Its wings lifted just a fraction. The air in the carriage seemed to tighten. A man in a black coat stepped inside with the new wave of passengers. Unlike the others, he did not look around casually. His eyes moved methodically, controlled, searching. He carried a small device in his hand, barely noticeable unless you were already watching for it. The hatchling saw him immediately. It didn't move, but its gaze locked onto him instantly. The man paused mid-step, just for a second. His eyes flicked across the tram, then landed on the hatchling. And everything in his expression changed. Not surprise, not confusion, confirmation. The hatchling made a low sound, barely audible. The man straightened slightly, his hand tightening around the device. "Found it," he murmured under his breath. No one else heard him, but the hatchling did. The tram doors began to close. The man stepped further inside, and the hatchling took one step forward. Slowly, deliberately, For the first time since it began riding the tram, it was no longer just a passenger. It was something being followed. The tram doors slid shut with a final metallic hiss, sealing the carriage in motion. The sound should have been ordinary, routine, but in that moment it felt like a lock engaging on something far larger than a vehicle. The man in the black coat didn't move immediately. He stood just inside the aisle, head slightly tilted, eyes locked on the hatchling like it was the only thing in the entire crowded carriage that mattered. Around him, passengers continued their silent rule of avoidance. Look forward, don't engage, pretend nothing is happening. But now the illusion was cracking. The hatchling stood in the center aisle, small, still, watching him back. Its faint glow pulsed once beneath its scales, subtle but noticeable to anyone paying close attention. The man slowly lifted the device in his hand. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense, no barrel, no obvious trigger, but it carried the same unsettling purpose. A soft hum began to rise from it, like a tuning frequency locking onto something. The hatchling reacted instantly, not with panic, with precision. His body lowered slightly, shifting its weight toward its back legs. Wings lifted a fraction more, not fully spread, just enough to signal readiness. The passengers around them finally started to notice that something had changed. Conversations stopped. Phones lowered. The quiet noise of the tram became suddenly loud in comparison. A woman near the window whispered, "What is happening?" No one answered her. The man in black took a slow step forward. "You've been difficult to track," he said calmly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried clearly through the carriage. The hatchling didn't respond. The device in his hand beeped softly. Once, then again. "Confirming signature," he muttered. The hatchling tilted its head slightly, as if listening to the sound more than the words. Then it made a low, sharp sound, small but filled with warning. The air in the carriage tightened further. A few passengers instinctively leaned away from the aisle. The man continued forward. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. "You deviated from extraction route 3 days ago." Extraction. That word changed everything. A man near the back suddenly stood up halfway, then stopped, unsure whether sitting or standing was safer. "Hey," he muttered quietly. "Is this some kind of security thing?" No one answered him. The hatchling took one slow step backward, not retreating in fear but repositioning. The man noticed immediately. "There it is," he said softly. Instinct confirmation. He raised the device slightly. The humming intensified. The hatchling's glow flickered in response, not dimming but sharpening. The tram rattled over a junction bridge, lights flickering slightly as it passed beneath overhead structures. The city outside blurred into streaks of steel and glass. Inside, everything had narrowed to a single confrontation. The hatchling suddenly shifted its attention, not just to the man, but to something beyond him. The passengers, the exits, the structure of the carriage itself. It was calculating. The man in black noticed the shift and frowned slightly. "Don't," he said. "You'll destabilize the containment field." The hatchling responded with another low sound, deeper this time. The lights inside the tram flickered again. A child sitting with their parent began to cry quietly, sensing the tension without understanding it. The parent pulled them closer instinctively. "We should get off at the next stop," someone whispered. But no one moved, because the doors were still closed, and the man in black was still advancing, step by step. "You were never meant for public exposure," he said. "You're a displacement anomaly, classified asset recovery priority." The hatchling suddenly moved, fast, not toward him but sideways. It darted along the aisle with surprising speed, weaving between seats and startled passengers. Gasps erupted. The man reacted instantly, turning to track it. "Don't let it break line of sight." He snapped into a calm hidden near his collar. Now it was clear. He wasn't alone. The hatchling reached the far end of the carriage and stopped abruptly near a window. It pressed one small claw against the glass. Outside, the city rushed past. Bridges, towers, layers of movement and light. The central district was approaching. Its destination, The man followed, closing distance. "Return to containment posture," he ordered. The device in his hand emitted a sharper pulse. The hatchling flinched just slightly, the first visible reaction of discomfort. But instead of retreating, it did something unexpected. It turned its head toward the passengers. Not the man, the people. For the first time, it looked less like prey, and more like something making a choice that involved them. The air in the tram shifted again. Heavier, tighter. The man noticed immediately and froze for half a second. "Wait!" he murmured. "That's not possible." The hatchling's glow intensified slightly. Not aggression, communication. And then, without warning, the tram jolted as it began slowing for the next station. The central hub. The man's eyes widened. "No," he said sharply. "Not there." The hatchling looked back at him one last time. And in that moment, everything changed. Because the man realized something he had not expected. It hadn't been escaping toward the city. It had been leading them to it. The tram began to slow as it entered the central hub station, but inside the carriage, no one felt relief. If anything, the tension tightened further, as if the movement toward a stop was not an ending, but a transition into something worse. The man in black took a sharp step forward, his attention fixed entirely on the hatchling now. His device hummed at a higher frequency, the sound vibrating faintly through the floor panels. "Lockdown movement," he said into his comm again. "It's trying to reach the convergence point." The hatchling stood perfectly still by the window. Outside, the city's central district unfolded in layers. Massive transit towers, elevated walkways, corporate spires reflecting daylight like blades of glass. It was the heart of everything. And somehow, the tiny dragon had brought itself directly to it. Passengers around them were no longer pretending nothing was happening. Fear had replaced curiosity. Confusion had replaced silence. A man near the aisle stood halfway, then sat again immediately when the hatchling turned its head slightly in his direction. Not threatening, just aware. That alone was enough. The tram jolted as it aligned with the station platform. A loud automated announcement played, completely ignoring the fact that reality inside the carriage had already broken its normal rules. Doors prepared to open. The man in black stepped closer again, now only a few meters away. "This ends here," he said quietly. The hatchling did not move. Instead, it pressed its claw gently against the window again. But this time, something changed. A faint ripple of light spread outward from the point of contact. Not visible to all passengers at first, but noticeable enough that several people gasped. The glass shimmered slightly, like heat distortion without heat. The man froze mid-step. "Wait," he said, his tone shifting for the first time. Uncertainty creeping in. "That's not an output signature." The hatchling's glow deepened subtly. Not brighter, denser. Like something compressing inward instead of expanding outward. The tram doors hissed as they began to open. The sound triggered movement in the carriage. People instinctively stepping back, some edging toward exits, others frozen in place. The man in black reacted instantly. "Containment breach imminent. Don't let it exit the vehicle," he shouted. But it was too late. The hatchling turned away from the window, slowly, deliberately, and looked directly at him. For the first time, there was no confusion in its gaze. No hesitation, just recognition. The man raised his device fully now, its hum escalating into a sharp, unstable tone. "You are not authorized to." The hatchling moved. Not fast like before. This time, precise. It stepped forward one single pace into the center aisle. And the entire tram responded. The lights flickered violently. The floor panels emitted a faint pulse in sync with the hatchling's movement. Even the automated systems outside the carriage seemed to stutter. Passengers gasped as the air itself felt heavier, like pressure dropping before a storm. The man in black staggered slightly. No, that's not synchronization possible at this scale," he muttered. The hatchling lowered its head slightly. The glow beneath its scales intensified again, but now it was no longer random. It was rhythmic, matched. The tram doors fully opened at the station. Noise from the central hub poured in: crowds, announcements, movement. But none of it mattered, because the hatchling was no longer just reacting to the man. It was reacting to the entire station. The man finally understood. His expression changed sharply. "It's not escaping," he said under his breath. "It's completing a route." The hatchling took another step forward. And the moment it did, something outside the tram responded. In the distance, faint structures within the station complex began to flicker, lights dimming in patterned intervals. Systems briefly desynchronized, as if something was waking up in the infrastructure itself. The man in black looked at his device in disbelief. "How is it interfacing with transit grid layers?" he whispered. The hatchling reached the edge of the open doors. Paused there, one step away from the platform, one step away from the city beyond. Passengers held their breath. The man raised his device one last time. "If you exit, we escalate full containment protocol," he warned. The hatchling did not look at him. It looked forward. And then, very softly, it stepped out of the tram. The effect was immediate. Not explosion. Not destruction. Alignment. The faint flickering in the station lights stabilized, forming a pattern. A sequence. A signal that echoed through unseen systems beneath the city. The man's device suddenly screamed in feedback overload. He stumbled back. "No, it's not a breach. It's a key," he said, voice breaking for the first time. Outside, the hatchling stood on the platform. Small, quiet, completely out of place in the vast machinery of the city. But everything around it had begun to adjust, like the city had been waiting for it to arrive. And now that it had, it remembered how to respond. The central station did not feel like a place anymore. Felt like an interface, a vast, breathing machine that had suddenly remembered it had been waiting for something to arrive. People on the platform still moved, walking, talking, rushing toward exits. But their movements now felt distant, almost irrelevant, like background noise to something far larger unfolding beneath them. The hatchling stood still just beyond the tram doors, small against the enormous architecture of glass, steel, and shifting light. Yet everything in the station seemed to orient around it in ways no one fully understood. The flickering lights had stabilized into a repeating pattern that ran along the ceiling panels and down the platform edges, like a circuit finally completing itself after years of silence. The man in black stepped out of the tram slowly. His device was still in his hand, but it was no longer stable. The screen flickered with corrupted data streams, symbols rearranging themselves faster than he could interpret. "This isn't a breach," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "It's not even a deviation." The hatchling tilted its head slightly toward him. Not threatening, not fleeing, waiting. The man swallowed hard. "It's a return signal," he finished quietly. Behind him, passengers were now fully reacting. Some backing away, others frozen in place, a few pulling out communication devices they clearly weren't sure would even work in this situation. A security voice crackled over the station speakers, distorted. "All transit operations are temporarily suspended due to system irregularity." The announcement repeated, but even that sounded wrong now, like it was being translated through something that didn't quite understand human language anymore. The hatchling took one step forward onto the platform. The sound of its claw touching the surface was soft, almost delicate, but the station responded instantly. A wave of synchronized light traveled outward from the point of contact, rippling through embedded lines in the floor and climbing up structural supports like glowing veins awakening. The man in black backed up a step without realizing it. "It's activating subgrid layers," he said urgently into his comm. "I need full classification override now." Static answered him. Not silence. Not failure. Resistance. The hatchling continued forward. One step, then another. It wasn't rushing. It wasn't escaping. It was moving with certainty, like every part of the station was simply catching up to a decision already made long ago. The lights above them shifted again, now forming directional lines, paths, routes. The man looked up, realization dawning fully now. "No," he whispered. "It's not just interfacing with transit systems. He glanced at the hatchling. It is the transit system. The words didn't make sense at first, even to him, but the station responded as if they were correct. Distant mechanical hums echoed beneath the platform. Systems activating that had not been used in years, maybe decades. Hidden infrastructure responding to a presence that clearly wasn't new, just forgotten. The hatchling stopped at the center of the platform. It lowered its head slightly, and for the first time it made a sound. Not a cry, not a roar, but a pulse of resonance that traveled through the entire station structure. Every light on the platform stabilized at once. Every flicker stopped. Every corrupted signal in the man's device suddenly resolved into a single line of coherent data. He stared at it in disbelief. Core routing node active, he read slowly. Then his voice dropped. No, that's not possible. The network core was decommissioned. The hatchling lifted its head again, and in response, the station beneath them answered. Somewhere deep in the infrastructure, something massive and dormant engaged. The entire transit hub vibrated faintly, not shaking, but aligning, like a machine waking up after dreaming for a very long time. People on the platform finally began to panic in earnest. Movement surged toward exits. Voices rose. Confusion broke into fear. But none of it mattered to what was happening between the hatchling and the system it had just reactivated. The man in black took another step back. If this continues, he said sharply, the entire district transit grid will sink to unknown command architecture. He looked at the hatchling again, this time with something closer to realization than control. It's not invading the system, he whispered. It's restoring it. The hatchling turned slightly toward the chaos of fleeing passengers, then back toward the glowing pathways forming across the station floor. It hesitated only for a moment. Then it began to walk forward again, deeper into the station, not as a captive, not as a threat, but as something returning to a place that already knew its name. And behind it, the city's transit network quietly began to remember how to breathe. The deeper the hatchling moved into the central station, the quieter the chaos around it became. Not because fear was disappearing, but because something larger was overriding it. The panic of people rushing toward exits, the shouting of confused security personnel, the crackling of distorted announcements. All of it began to feel like it was happening in a different layer of reality. Above the hatchling, the station lights no longer flickered randomly. They flowed. Lines of soft illumination stretched along ceilings and down pillars, forming structured pathways that pulsed in a slow, deliberate rhythm. It was no longer just reacting. It was guiding. The man in black followed at a distance, his device now half-functional at best. Data streamed across its cracked interface in unstable bursts, trying to interpret what it was witnessing and failing repeatedly. This isn't containment failure, he muttered under his breath. This is system remembrance. The words felt wrong even as he said them. The hatchling paused at a junction point where multiple corridors branched out through the station. Here, the glow beneath the floor was strongest, dense, concentrated lines of light forming a circular pattern beneath its feet. It lowered its head slightly again, and the station responded instantly. A deep mechanical hum echoed through the walls, not loud, but resonant, felt more than heard, like something massive shifting its attention. The man's device suddenly stabilized for half a second. A single line of clear data appeared before flickering again. He read it quickly. Transit core node, active directive syncing. He froze. Directive, he repeated. The hatchling stepped forward into the center of the glowing pattern. The moment it did, the entire station seemed to lock into alignment. All motion outside of it felt secondary. Even the fleeing crowd slowed, not physically, but perceptually, as if the environment itself had deprioritized them. The man in black's voice dropped. It's not just restoring transit functions, he said slowly. It's restoring command hierarchy. The hatchling turned its head slightly toward him, as if acknowledging that he was finally saying something close to correct. Then it continued forward. The station responded more strongly now. Hidden panels along the walls slid open silently, revealing old maintenance pathways, dormant data conduits, and structural cores that had not been exposed in years. Everything was illuminated in faint synchronized pulses that matched the hatchling's movement step for step. The man's comm unit finally cut through the interference. A distorted voice broke in. All units report anomaly escalation. Central hub is not responding to manual override. The man lifted his device slightly. Because it's not a manual system anymore, he said quietly. It's an active one. The hatchling reached the center of the junction and stopped again. This time it did not look around. It looked upward. The ceiling of the station, vast, layered, full of embedded systems, began to respond. Thin lines of light ignited across structural beams, connecting points that had no visible purpose before now. The entire station was forming a network map in real time, a map that had been dormant until this exact moment. The man stepped closer without realizing it. "What are you?" he whispered. The hatchling did not answer. Instead, it let out a soft pulse, identical to before but deeper now, more structured. The station answered in full. A massive section of the far wall shifted, revealing a sealed gateway that slowly unlocked with mechanical precision. Air hissed through long-unused seals. Lights cascaded along its edges like a system waking from deep sleep. The man's eyes widened. "That access point hasn't been opened in decades," he said. The hatchling turned toward it immediately. No hesitation, no fear, recognition. It began walking again, straight toward the gateway. The man raised his voice. "If you go through that, we lose containment jurisdiction entirely." The hatchling paused for half a second, then continued. The station lights dimmed behind it and brightened ahead of it, like the entire system was shifting its focus forward. The man finally understood fully. "It's not escaping," he said softly. "It's reconnecting the core line." The hatchling reached the gateway. It pressed one small claw against the massive sealed structure, and the entire station went silent. For a single breathless moment, everything stopped. Movement, sound, even panic itself. Then the gateway began to open. Not forced, not hacked, recognized. And as the doors parted, revealing a long-forgotten corridor of glowing infrastructure stretching deep beneath the city, the hatchling stepped forward without hesitation. The man in black stood frozen at the edge of the platform. His device flickered one last time before stabilizing completely. A final line appeared on the screen before locking into place. "Core route restored. Operator detected." He looked up just in time to see the hatchling disappear into the corridor of light below the city. And for the first time since the system had gone dark, the city's transit network began to function exactly as it was originally designed to.